Somewhere on the Arctic tundra, 4,000 years ago, a family survived a night that should have killed them. No gear, no engineered walls, no power source beyond a flame the size of a fist. And outside, the air wasn't just cold. It was hunting. At -40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold stops being a temperature. It becomes a force. A mechanical, invisible force with one purpose: to find heat and erase it. When winds sweep across open tundra, at 40 to 50 miles per hour, they don't pass over surfaces. They strip them. There's a process called forced convection. It peels away the thin molecular layer of warmth clinging to anything exposed. Skin freezes in minutes. Breath crystallizes midair. Even materials begin to fail, brittle, rigid, unforgiving. And yet, that family survived. Not by accident. By understanding something about this environment that most people today have never been taught. By the end of this, you'll understand why the most brilliant engineers in human history never drew a single blueprint and still built one of the most thermally efficient structures ever conceived. But cold alone wasn't the real enemy. The real enemy was something far more invisible and far more patient. Think of the Arctic not as a place that is cold. Think of it as a place that is hungry. Every unit of warmth you generate from your body, from a fire, from anything is immediately pulled outward, absorbed, dispersed into the vast, energy-hungry void surrounding you. Scientists call this an infinite heat sink. There is no saturation point, no moment where the environment has taken enough. It simply keeps taking, without pause, without mercy, and the wind makes it exponentially worse. When high-speed air hits any structure, it creates a pressure differential. High pressure on the windward side, low pressure on the opposite side. That difference generates suction constant, relentless pulling warm air outward through every crack, every seam, every gap too small to see with the naked eye. Consider the best cold weather technology available today. Military-grade insulation, synthetic thermal layers built in laboratories. In sustained Arctic exposure, without structural protection, even that fails. Because cold doesn't just touch you here. It reaches inside. It strips warmth the way a tide pulls sand slow at first. Then suddenly, everything is gone. That feeling of being unmade by temperature, that was the daily reality for the people who chose to live here. So they couldn't fight it directly. They couldn't generate enough heat to outpace what was being stolen. The only option left was to think differently than any civilization before them. The first instinct of every civilization that has ever faced extreme cold is the same. Build a fire. Build a wall. These two responses are wired into human survival across every culture, every era, every corner of recorded history. They are not strategies. They are reflexes. Older than language. Older than memory. And for 10,000 years, they worked. They built empires. They kept children alive through winters that should have been fatal. They are the reason the human species is still here. And in the high Arctic, they would have killed you. Not because fire is useless. Because fire alone, against an infinite heat sink, is almost meaningless. There is no forest on the open tundra. No timber for beams. No wood for sustained combustion. No fuel that burns long enough to matter. The only available source was animal fat producing a flame, yes, but a small one. Localized. Fragile. A single candle held against a hurricane. Against the scale of Arctic heat loss, it changes almost nothing, unless something else changes first. And walls made everything worse. A structure built on the surface with vertical sides, flat faces, angular corners, becomes a leaking system under constant attack. Wind pressure finds every joint. Every seam becomes a failure point. Every gap, every microscopic space where two materials meet, becomes a place where warmth is actively pulled outward and lost. The structure doesn't just fail to keep heat in. It participates in taking heat out. Here is what makes this so disorienting. The instinct that kept every other civilization alive, the instinct that is correct everywhere else on Earth, would have been a slow death sentence here. More fire. Thicker walls. Both answers. Both wrong. Surviving this environment didn't mean building better. It meant thinking differently. It meant abandoning 10,000 years of human building instinct, not over generations, not gradually, but in a single, radical leap. What they arrived at has never been fully replicated by any modern civilization. And it started not by building up but by going down. Every other culture built upward. The Thule looked at the same sky and made the opposite choice. They built downward. Not in defeat. Not in desperation. In wisdom that took generations of failure, observation, and survival to earn. The decision itself sounds almost too simple. Sink the structure approximately 3 feet below ground level. Step out of the most lethal layer of the environment entirely. But simple decisions, made at the right moment, change everything. Above the surface, the world is chaotic, wind-dominated, volatile, unpredictable in ways that make survival nearly impossible to engineer around. Every wall you build becomes a surface the wind attacks. Every corner becomes a pressure point. Every degree of temperature you generate becomes something the environment immediately tries to reclaim. Above the surface, you are always losing. Below it, the world behaves by entirely different rules. The wind disappears. Not weakens, disappears. Temperature fluctuations slow dramatically. Heat loss becomes predictable instead of catastrophic. For the first time, the environment stops fighting back. What the Thule had done, without instruments, without theory, without a single written calculation, was shift their entire survival problem from the domain of weather into the domain of geology. Weather is violent, random, and relentless. Geology is patient, stable, and vast. One destroys. The other simply holds. By shaping the roof into a dome and lowering the structure into the earth, airflow redirected smoothly over the surface. No sharp edges to catch the wind. No vertical walls to absorb force. No angles to create pressure zones. The house stopped being an object in the environment. It became part of the landscape. Exposure reduced by up to 85%. Pressure-driven heat loss nearly eliminated. The structure had effectively vanished from the Arctic's reach. Imagine stepping down into that structure for the very first time. The howling above doesn't stop. The wind is still out there, still moving at 40 miles per hour, still stripping everything it touches. But suddenly, it cannot reach you. There is stillness. A warmth that isn't warmth yet, just the absence of being taken from. A quiet that feels almost sacred after hours in the open. That stillness was not luck. That silence was engineered. Today, NASA references permafrost insulation principles in the design of lunar habitat systems. The concept those engineers are drawing from is 4,000 years old. But disappearing underground solved only half the problem. Now they needed a roof with no trees, no metal, no timber of any kind. What they used instead was stranger than anything you'd expect. Beneath the Arctic surface lies a resource most people never consider. Not oil, not minerals, not anything you could extract or trade or measure in the usual ways. Stability. The permafrost, frozen ground, unchanged in some regions, for thousands of years, maintains a relatively constant temperature near 32 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of what the air above does. Regardless of whether a storm is tearing across the tundra or the temperature has dropped to its most extreme. Below the chaos, the Earth simply holds. While the surface world swings between brutal, life-ending extremes, the ground beneath resists. It resists, change the way only something with enormous mass can slowly, powerfully, without effort, without exhaustion. It has been holding that temperature since before any of these people were born. It will hold it long after. That consistency, that refusal to be moved by what happens above, is one of the most valuable physical properties available anywhere in this environment. The Thule recognized it, and they built around it. Think of it as a thermal battery, not a battery that generates energy. That distinction matters deeply. One that stores it, buffers it, absorbs the small amount of heat produced inside the structure and keeps it from vanishing into the void above. By embedding a dwelling into this mass, the interior stops equalizing with the deadly air outside. It begins equalizing with the Earth itself. Even without any additional heat source, the interior holds near freezing, survivable, manageable, a foundation to build warmth from. Add a small flame, and the temperature climbs, not because the flame is powerful, but because almost nothing escapes. The system has stopped losing. And a system that stops losing, even with the smallest input, begins to win. For thousands of years, every civilization that faced cold answered the same way. Generate more heat. Burn more fuel. Build bigger fires. Push harder against the environment. The Thule asked a different question entirely. What if we stopped fighting and simply borrowed stability from something older than memory? That question, asked without instruments or theory, arrived at an answer that modern science has spent decades rediscovering. Today, geothermal heating systems operate on this exact principle and are considered among the most energy-efficient technologies available on Earth. The tool built the first working version 4,000 years ago, with nothing but observation, patience, and necessity, pressing down on every decision. The Earth gave them temperature, but they still needed structure. And the answer was buried not in the ground, but in the ocean. Without timber, without metal, without any material that every other building tradition in human history has depended on, the tool needed something that could span a living space, support the weight of heavy accumulated snow, and resist the slow, compounding pressure of an entire Arctic winter without failing. What they found was already out there, in the water, waiting. A single bowhead whale provides tens of tons of usable material, but it is the jawbones, the mandibles, some stretching over 15 feet in length, that changed everything. These bones are naturally curved, dense beyond what most materials can match. Shaped across millions of years of biological engineering into a form that functions almost identically to what structural engineers call an architectural arch. Not by design, by evolution, by the same physics that governs every bridge, every vault, every dome that human hands have ever built. Arranged in a circular pattern and set into the earth, these bones formed exactly that, a dome. And the dome is not a simple shape. It is one of the most load-efficient geometries in existence because it does something flat structures cannot. It converts the downward force of weight into compression along its curved surface rather than bending stress concentrated at a single point. Load does not accumulate. It distributes. It travels down the curve and into the ground, where the earth absorbs it. The structure holds not by resisting force, but by redirecting it. The ocean had become architecture. But killing a bowhead whale was not merely a survival act. It was never treated as merely that. It was a covenant. The Thule believed the whale offered itself willingly, that the hunt was not a conquest but an agreement between species, between worlds. And covenants carry obligations. In return for the whale's offering, nothing was wasted. Nothing could be. Its meat fed the village through months when nothing else could be hunted. Its blubber lit the lamps that held back the dark. Its sinew became thread. Its bones became the home, every arch, every beam, every joint of the structure that kept the family alive through the night that should have killed them. One life sustained an entire civilization. And that covenant was honored in every surface, every connection, every carefully placed element of the structure built from it. This was not construction. It was gratitude made physical. Structure was solved. But a skeleton, even a perfect one, still lets the cold in. What they wrapped around those bones, that's where the real genius was. Over the whalebone frame, thick animal hides were stretched tight, a windproof membrane across the entire surface. But that was only the first layer. On top of the hides, dense blocks of tundra sod were packed until the outer shell reached nearly 3 feet thick. And here is where something happened that separates this structure from every other shelter ever built in extreme cold. The sod was installed with roots facing inward. Those roots were still alive, and they stayed alive. Over days and weeks, the root systems continued to grow, weaving together, intertwining across seams and gaps, slowly knitting the outer layer into a single, continuous biological mass. Small cracks sealed themselves. Weak points reinforced without any human intervention. Most shelters are built once and slowly die. This one was built once and slowly came alive. It breathed as the season changed. It grew as winter deepened. It healed when the wind found a weakness. The people inside were not living in a house the way we understand that word. They were living inside something closer to an organism. Something that responded to the same environment they were surviving. They didn't build a house. They cultivated one. Now, the system reveals what it was always building toward. Inside this structure, earth-embedded, dome-shaped, wrapped in living sod, a single oil lamp burning seal fat was enough. Not enough to merely survive. Enough to be genuinely warm. The lamp itself was modest. A shallow stone vessel. Rendered blubber. A moss wick. A flame you could cup in both hands. And yet, interior temperatures could reach positive 50 degrees Fahrenheit, while the air outside sat at negative 40. A difference of nearly 100 degrees. Not through energy production, through energy retention. The thick sod insulated. The permafrost stabilized. The dome redirected airflow. The buried walls eliminated pressure-driven loss. Every element worked in the same direction. The system no longer lost heat rapidly. It accumulated instead. Imagine sitting inside that space. Children asleep beside you. The lamp barely flickering, its light soft against the bone frame above. Outside, the Arctic is doing what it always does. Pulling, stripping, erasing everything exposed to it. And it cannot reach you. Not because you overpowered it. Because you understood it well enough to disappear from it entirely. But here is where the story takes one final turn. Because the same system that solved everything introduced a new way to die. By sealing the structure so completely eliminating nearly every pathway through which air could move, the tool had created something extraordinary. And extraordinarily dangerous. A burning oil lamp consumes oxygen, releases carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Human bodies exhale, produce moisture. In an open structure, these byproducts disperse. In a sealed one, they accumulate. Slowly at first, then fatally. The very perfection of the design had become its deadliest feature. Too much ventilation and the preserved heat bleeds out into the Arctic void, undoing everything. Too little and the air becomes poison, quietly, without warning. The solution was not a single innovation. It was a calibration. Entrance tunnels, designed to function as airflow regulators, drawing fresh air in along the ground, allowing spent air to escape through controlled openings above. The geometry of the tunnel itself determined how much air moved and at what rate. Engineering at its most delicate. Not building something strong. Tuning something alive. Remember the question that opened all of this: what kind of house survives the Arctic? Now you know the answer. It isn't a house at all. It is a living equation. Every element depends on every other. And the final variable, the one that determined whether the whole thing sustained life or ended it, was air itself. Perfection in engineering is never static. It is a balance you maintain or it turns against you. What the Thule built, seen as a complete system, has no precise modern equivalent. The Earth stabilized temperature. The buried structure eliminated wind exposure. The dome redirected airflow and distributed load. The living sod insulated and self-repaired. The single lamp provided heat the system was designed to keep, not constantly replace. The ventilation tunnels sustained life without sacrificing warmth. No fossil fuels. No manufactured materials. No excess. Every element served multiple functions simultaneously. The whole operated as a closed loop, requiring almost nothing from the outside world, because it had learned to work entirely within the rules of the world it occupied. The Thule did not conquer the Arctic. They read it, with a depth of attention that most modern engineers would struggle to match. They found where the environment was already offering something. Stability in the permafrost, geometry in the whalebone, life in the roots of tundra grass. They stepped into what was already there. The Thule didn't leave behind temples or monuments. They left behind something rarer, a way of thinking. A proof that intelligence, at its highest form, is not about what you can force the world to do. It is about understanding what the world is already doing, and stepping into that flow. We spend billions engineering buildings that fight nature. They spent nothing and built something that joined it. Maybe the question isn't how advanced we've become. Maybe it's how much we've forgotten.